Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ryan Bransford. I'm the CEO at OuterSpatial. My co-presenter here is Jeremy Wimpy, and we'll be doing quick introductions here in a second. You're in the session titled App-Based Techniques to Survey Visitors in Yosemite. I wanted to start off by just thanking the California Trails and Greenways Conference and all the sponsors for putting this awesome conference together. I've participated in this many years, and it's exciting to be here once again. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and let Jeremy introduce himself. I'll introduce myself. I'll give a quick overview of and sort of an outline of what we're going to be talking about today. And then I'll let Jeremy kind of kick off his initial section. So Jeremy, you want to go to the next slide? I guess I'll introduce myself first because I'm listed first. My name is Ryan Bransford. It's my family, and I'm based here in San Francisco, California. Been in the field of recreation and conservation for about 25 years, and started my career in the National Park Service. Spent a lot of time working for public agencies and nonprofits, primarily supporting those organizations with technology and really around mapping, geospatial analysis, web map, mobile apps, connecting people to the outdoors. So I'm going to be talking, a little bit about the work that we've done to support Jeremy and the project that he's leading in Yosemite. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Jeremy.
Great, thank you, Ryan. And thanks for joining us today. I'm Jeremy Wimpy. I'm a recreation ecologist stationed at Virginia Tech in the Forest Resources and Environmental Conservation Program. And I also have a firm called Applied Trails Research. I'm in the photo on the right there, actually working in the park we're going to be talking a bit about today, the Yosemite National Park. This was actually early 2008, maybe, working on a visitor use study on the Half Dome cables with some partners from other universities, University of Vermont and others. As I mentioned, I'm a rec ecologist, so we study recreational impacts to primarily public lands and do a lot of work with the Forest Service and the Park Service. Similar to Ryan, I have a little bit of a geospatial background, and we're constantly trying to leverage appropriate geospatial tools to assist managers to address vexing visitor use management and wilderness management problems. So I'm going to start out here, just a quick overview of Yosemite. This is obviously a very famous national park unit. It was initially protected back in 1864 prior to the establishment of the Park Service. And in 1984, it was added to the World Heritage site, listed as a World Heritage site. Something that a lot of folks don't know, a lot of folks that visit Yosemite spend, there's lots of crowds and a lot of folks in the front country settings in the valley, but 95% of this park's landmass is federally designated wilderness. And due to that, a lot of the backcountry is managed under the guidance that the Federal Program of Wilderness Management requires, and they have a fantastic staff there at the park that work to address visitor use management issues across this vast and relatively diverse landscape. As you all know, COVID-19 last year, I think a lot of our public lands and parks and public places saw big spikes in the number of recreationists out enjoying our public lands, which is fantastic. But there's a larger kind of dynamic visitation context that the Central Sierra and Yosemite National Park in particular have been seeing over the decades. It has two significant trails that interact with this landscape. The John Muir Trail connects Sequoia and Kings National Park to the south of Yosemite up to Yosemite, and a lot of that portions of the John Muir Trail are coincident with the Pacific Crest National Scenic Trail, or what we commonly call the PCT, the Pacific Crest Trail, which is a Forest Service administered 2,600 mile long trail that connects Mexico to Canada along basically the spine of the Sierra Crest. And moving northward into Oregon and Washington as well. Increasing use pressure from both of those trails and these system of high Sierra camps that the park maintains in the backcountry. You can see some of those called out, like Vogelsang, on this landscape have created management challenges for a long time on this landscape. As part of managing federally designated wilderness, the managers in the park are tasked with managing for what we see here in this picture, opportunities for solitude and primitive and unconfined recreation on the pretty remote landscapes. In reality, we know, as some of you probably have been to the park, often we see this setting. This is in the front country, but it's immediately adjacent to a lot of this wilderness. And so as we see high numbers of use and this dynamic use patterns on the landscape, the managers are really pressed with answering the question of, how much is too much? Are there management tools that allow us to have relatively high levels of use in wilderness while preserving wilderness character, whether it's the opportunities for solitude or this primitive and unconfined recreation, as well as managing for impacts to natural and cultural resources. So this kind of hypothetical figure really speaks to this wilderness character, which is a little bit amorphous, and we'll talk more about as we explore the study we're undertaking. But looking at the relationship between the number of visitors and the number of campers in the backcountry and the quality of wilderness character that's able to be preserved on the landscape. So Yosemite National Park has been managing for wilderness character and wilderness use since it was a park. But in the 1970s, the park scientist Jan van Wagdendonk, I got through that correctly, was a social scientist in the park, and he did the first study that really looked at pairing visitor use levels across a system of zones in the backcountry of this park, and looking at the relationship of wilderness character and how they can best manage for that. In the early 2000s, Colorado State University did an update to that, looking again primarily at travel patterns and linking zones and trailheads, which we'll look at some diagrams here for how this was done in the next handful of slides. In 2010 and 2011, Dr. Steve Martin and some of his graduate students revisited this, Humboldt State professor. And about 2017, we started working with the park. We work extensively with the Pacific Crest Trail and Pacific Crest Trail Association, and working with these Sierra managers, we started talking about revisiting this visitor use travel pattern study and coupling it with a wilderness character component to help them update their baselines for both conditions as well as visitor perceptions of wilderness character on this landscape. And as a part of that, we wanted to modernize technologies. I'm going to introduce some of those technologies, and Ryan's going to talk you through a lot of the work that OuterSpatial and their tools that they've developed to help us with a portion of this data collection. So in Yosemite, this is the footprint of the entirety of the park. They have 57 wilderness zones. For some reason, they started numbering them at 46, I believe. And this is what that looks like on the landscape. Again, this is 95% of the landmass. Some of the grayed out area that's a little bit hard to see there, the valley that a lot of folks are familiar with, is out of wilderness, but the remainder is in federally designated wilderness. That's overlain with over 750 miles of trail. And I don't have the road mileage in front of me, but a pretty extensive road network that accesses this park and over the passes to the east side of the Sierra. And Jan van Wagdendonk's work in the 70s really worked to look at these 55 trailhead entry points that provide entry onto that 750-mile network of trails. So there's 55 trailhead locations within the park's footprint. And his work worked to gained information about where visitors go if they enter at a specific trailhead on a specific itinerary. For example, if they enter at trailhead X, how many wilderness zones do they go and camp in? Where do they overnight on their itinerary? And then where do they exit? With the shuttle system and folks shuttling in private vehicles, we know that folks don't always enter and exit at the same trailhead. And from that work that Jan did in the 70s, they came up with relationships for the number to ration or quota or allocate number of entry permits at each trailhead to balance use across the zones. And one of my first questions when I was introduced to this system long before we did research was, why are we managing zones with trailheads? And it's a great question, and it gets back to wilderness character. Folks value their primitive and unconfined recreation in these wilderness settings as part of managing for that wilderness character mandate. They want people to be free to choose their own itinerary once they're on the landscape. So rather than having permits tied to those zones and requiring folks to move from zone to zone in a sequence as they're on their backcountry trip. The park managers felt, and now that I've worked with them quite a bit, I agree that, this trailhead entry quota certainly preserves that feeling of wilderness character on this vast landscape, and freedom of choice to move about in any way you please, with a few exceptions. Half Dome that we saw in the early photos being one of those exceptions. So our methods and our goals with this study are it's a monitoring study. So we want to replicate the past methods. We don't want to create new data that's not directly comparable to the past efforts. But we do want to modernize the methods and utilize some modern tools. Some of that was done over the past with the revisiting in the early aughts, and then in 2011 with Steve Martin. They moved from narrative engagement with the visitors in the parking lot that Jan did with his team. They did travel diaries and electronic data capture with modern tools to conduct these interviews with folks as they exited. For our study, we're continuing to do those, but we're focusing heavily on personal device data collection. So developing an app that lets folks respond to the questionnaires for a series of questions about their trip on their own terms and on their own pace, and without seeing us out in the landscape, intercepting them and interviewing them or capturing them at their exit. Like I said, we will still be doing that a little bit with our field staff, mainly to replicate those past efforts, and also as part of our academic interest in seeing if there's a significant difference between the folks that choose to use their personal device for data collection when they're in a wilderness setting, or the folks that we capture elsewhere through more traditional methods. And so I'm going to walk through kind of with the focus here on the app. You can see a screenshot from the challenge that OuterSpatial worked with us to develop. Ryan will give you a lot more technical detail on this, but I'll walk through the mechanics of how our survey is administered with this study, both in a pilot that we undertook in 2020. Given the pandemic, we shifted our primary field season to 2021 at this point. We were able to launch a pilot in 2020 that went through these steps, and we'll share some of the results of that after Ryan presents with you all. So a series of questions are asked of folks. The first bank of questions is delivered with an email to permit holders that the park maintains this permit system, and they contact folks prior to their trip, asking them to install the app and then go forth and complete what we're calling the group and trip plan questions. These are kind of your pre-trip questions that ask things about where you're from, your group size, your intended route, your entry trailhead, your intended route, and your exit trailhead, some other information about the length of your stay. And then during our trip, so imagine someone's on a 3-day or a 3-night trip, we ask them, the app prompts questions for folks every night and every morning. And here we're talking to folks about how they selected their campsite, why they selected their campsite, as well as questions about crowding and conflict, and other questions pertinent to wilderness character and wilderness user experience. And then the final bank of questions is delivered at the end of the itinerary or after the folks are leaving the park, and it asks them to respond to some questions about their overall experience rather than the specific night they spend at each camping location within the park. And with that, I'm going to hand this over to Ryan, and he's going to talk to you a little bit more about the technical aspects that help us collect. As I alluded to, there's this wilderness character that the questions are really centered on, but also the travel pattern study and capturing the locations of folks through these tools. Thanks, Ryan.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. And it's a great kind of overview of the study. I wanted to take a few minutes to introduce you guys to OuterSpatial. Jeremy's alluded to it a few times, and talk to, just give you a foundation of understanding of what OuterSpatial is, what it does, why we exist, and the types of organizations we support. And then I'm going to kind of dive in a little bit of the specifics to support the Yosemite survey. And then we'll kind of pass it back over to Jeremy for some of the results from the survey. So yeah, this is kind of just a quick outline of what I'm going to talk about, and talk a little bit about just sort of how organizations traditionally engage with visitors digitally, and a little bit about the mobile app sort of ecosystem for outdoor recreation. And then organizations that think about offering a mobile app, what are some different approaches, and then I'll kind of characterize OuterSpatial, what it is specifically. I couldn't help but to mention a few things related to COVID, and so I'll talk a little bit about that, and then like I said, I'll dive into the specifics of how we supported and continue to support Yosemite and Jeremy's team and the Park Service with that project. And then lastly, we'll come back after Jeremy talks, we'll come back to me, and I just want to show how we're kind of leveraging some of what we built to make it available kind of more ubiquitously to other organizations that might want to do something similar. So with that, before I kind of dive into slides, I just wanted people to feel like they're engaging, interacting. Obviously, we're going to have the Q&A here at the end. And by the way, if anyone has any questions, please do ask them in the chat throughout the rest of this talk. Hopefully you guys are taking advantage of that so we can queue up some questions for the end. But yeah, just think about this. Have you ever personally used a mobile app as a part of a recreation activity? I think that what we're seeing is a lot more people using mobile apps to enhance their outdoor activities. So just think about that a little bit as I'm talking. So yeah, OuterSpatial is really about empowering organizations, land managers, and nonprofits, and the stewards of the land to really deliver the best outdoor experience to visitors. Traditionally, the way that organizations engage with their community and digitally is kind of in these three buckets. You have your website, your social media accounts, and your newsletter, or your email. And this is pretty standard and tried and true, and this is not going to go away. Obviously, your website is powerful. People come to it, they use it. You guys invest, organizations invest a lot of energy into making that look nice, making sure it's dynamic, up to date. You track your social media, you're trying to get people to follow you and engage you there. That's great. And then obviously, email is just, going to continue to be a valuable channel of communication. But I think we all know, just anecdotally from our own years, our own sort of personal use, it's a much more mobile oriented world. We're all on our phones now more than we were, a couple of years ago, and that continues to trend in that direction. There's pros and cons there, but I'm just kind of speaking to the reality. But when you look at how people are actually spending time on their phones, and we all know we spend more time on our phones, but if you actually dig into the statistics, about 90% of the time people spend on their phone is in a native mobile app. It's not on the web. I mean, you are on the web, obviously, but the vast majority is in a native mobile app, and that's for all sorts of reasons. And a lot of this is, social media and gaming and your email app, your Google Maps or your Apple Maps app type apps that are kind of pre-installed in your phone. But when you look at the outdoor recreation space, that's happening at scale. This is a popular app that many people have probably heard of called Strava. Tens of millions of people use this app to kind of engage with the outdoors and track their activities. And there's a lot of others out there. And I'm a huge fan of this sort of ecosystem of apps that are out there. But when you look at sort of the current ecosystem through the lens of land managers, there's some challenges and there's kind of a bit of a disconnect. So if you're the National Park Service, or you're a public agency at any level, a city, a county, a state, a nonprofit group, and you manage or engage somehow with recreation assets, the reality is people are probably finding out about those and engaging with them through a channel that you don't have any relationship or connection with. So when people go to Google Maps, for example, or some of the other apps out there, that content and that information is coming from some third-party source or through some crowdsourced element. It's not coming from you as the organization. So we feel like that's a big disconnect. You may want to close a trail. You may want to post an event. You may want to just share a story or a narrative about maybe the funding source or the organizations that are involved in building those trails or those recreation assets. So there's a big disconnect there. The other side is the analytics. I think it's pretty common these days that people invest energy into looking at who comes to their website as you consider, how you promote your website, how you put content up there. And that's pretty standard nowadays. But with mobile, that's also a huge thing. You have the mobile side of it's really interesting because you have the geographic location. So you kind of know location as well as how they're engaging with content. And all the people that are using apps that are not your app, you're not getting access to that information. We feel like that can be really powerful for organizations to help them do better planning, do better resource management, visitation management, understand how to invest your marketing capacity and efforts. And then there's this kind of like crowdsourcing bucket, and crowdsourcing has a lot of positives and negatives. But a lot of times it does become a challenge for public agencies because of that lack of control. And the control is actually coming from the people on the ground, which can be really positive, but also can create some challenges. You may want to not allow people to go to a certain area because of ecological sensitivity, or because it's dangerous, with some erosion, or maybe there was a fire in the previous season and there's some downed trees or whatnot. So just people going to areas that you don't want them to go to, and sort of how the crowd fits into that can be a challenge, and we hear that over and over from land managers. On the flip side, we think there's a huge opportunity. If you do actually offer a really nice modern mobile app to your community, all of a sudden you can engage with them through that channel, similar to your website and all the other channels I mentioned before. So there is a pretty neat opportunity there. And this is just an illustration of that. If every organization that we work with is strapped for cash and capacity and resources, and they can't really send people out to all the right places at all the right times, sort of day to day. So leveraging the crowd, building a collaborative relationship with people out there in a way where they're benefiting themselves and their peers, but also you as an organization, and vice versa. There's this symbiotic kind of partnership that we're helping to facilitate through this sort of app channel. So it might be asking them a question, interviewing them like we've done with Jeremy's team, or it might be just people taking photos of trail conditions or hazards on the trail or whatever it may be. So there's a big opportunity with crowdsourcing. So a lot of organizations get to this point where they're like, okay, well, I get it. People are using native mobile apps. We should have some sort of offering. Like, what do we do? Like, what's out there? And when you start to look at the options, there's really not that many. You kind of have a couple of key options. One is either you're going to build your own app, or you're going to hire someone to build you an app to your kind of specification, or you're going to join kind of an existing platform. And I would never recommend to really any organization to kind of take those first two approaches, unless the National Park Service is a good example where they do have an interpretive app. They're big enough, but if you're a city or a county or even a state agency, it's just really, really expensive. And you're talking about on the order of $1 million plus to build a nice modern, native iOS app. And then you have Android, and it's very complicated and very expensive. And then you got to maintain it and keep it updated year to year. And you got to be constantly on top of what the interface should look like in terms of what visitors are expecting in sort of a modern, recreation type app. So really, that's what we do at OuterSpatial, is we kind of take that off the table for you. You don't have to worry about the fact that iOS changed, their operating system last week. You don't have to worry about, that dynamic nature of technology. We'll kind of keep up with the latest and support you, and then really just provide you an opportunity to focus on what organizations tend to be traditionally really good at, which is interpretation, really good quality content, storytelling, curated information, obviously closures and dynamic information, along those lines, where you want to keep things sort of up to date. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, OuterSpatial is a free mobile app for visitors, and it's really the main differentiator is that anything going into the app is coming directly from a land manager or an organization that represents, one of their partner organizations. And it's all the geospatial data, like where the trails are and the points of interest, like the bathrooms and visitor center, to the content, whether it's an event you have going on, or a curated experience that might cater to like a family, or a long distance trail runner, or anything in between. So all that content is coming directly from organizations that leverage OuterSpatial as their sort of app offering. And ultimately, our focus and our mission is really to empower the public agencies to provide this great experience to their visitors. So there is this kind of cycle where as you promote it and market it to your community and they use your app and engage with it, that information makes its way back to you, whether it's analytics, whether it's how people are using the app with like checking into locations or posting photos or whatever it happens to be. So it's just this new channel that organizations traditionally have not taken advantage of. Behind the scenes is this thing called Manager, which is kind of like a traditional content management system, kind of like how you would update content on your website. It's the same type of thing. It's a web-based, desktop-based system that allows you and your staff and your volunteers, your interns, or whoever else that you give permission to go in and manage content and then publish that out as needed. And then the app, has a lot of the functionality to expect with search and discoverability and events that are happening, dynamic information like alerts and notifications, your GPS, and be able to track and stay, on the right trail while you're out there in the field. Just a couple quick slides on COVID. I think that with the pandemic and the idea of virtual and sort of, contactless engagement with visitors is a really big thing right now, and for obvious reasons. And a lot of groups have started to do like scavenger hunts and trail challenges and these virtual programming, and they've been hugely successful. And really, people love these. So we've been building some functionality that really supports organizations with doing that, and it's been fun to see. And these are just a couple slides for people posting in the social feed around their scavenger hunts and, finding things that organizations are incentivizing them to track down, whether it's wood carvings like this group, or going to a key photo spot to take a selfie at like a labyrinth or whatnot. So that's really been exciting to see organizations be able to leverage the app for that. And then other organizations doing things like getting rid of their paper maps for various reasons, and partly because of COVID, and suggesting that folks get those access to those paper maps through the mobile app. And things like mapping out the trails that are greater than 6 feet wide. That was pretty. I thought that was really innovative. It's a group called the Mid-Peninsula Region Open Space District did this, and allowing people to identify trails where they can feel safe, even if there are crowds. Doing one-way trails, I thought was a really great idea. Folks updating their maps to show one-way trails. And here's my little GPS. I'm about to go on this hike with some of their staff, and follow that trail one way. So this idea of paper, the park brochure maps showing up in an app environment with the GPS creates this, more value than they traditionally would have as just a physical paper map. And then lots of different ways to, openings, closures. There seem to be a lot of that going on right now. So there's a lot of opportunities to publish that kind of information. Yeah, and then lastly, we just work with a lot of different organizations at different levels, from federal, state, local, all across the country. So yeah, that's the kind of baseline that's what OuterSpatial is all about. Hopefully that's helpful for you all. I'm just going to take a minute or two, and then I'll pass it back to Jeremy. But so yeah, we have this platform. We work with over 150 organizations throughout the country. Jeremy and Applied Trails Research and his team and some of the other professors and academics reached out to us in partnership with the Park Service and basically said, we like this idea of being like a stewardship first app approach. And could we have a feature in there that would support using the app to ask a series of questions based on where they were at and the time of day, and being registering and being a part of this particular project. And so what we did is we worked very closely with a number of partners, Jeremy and his colleague Nathan and others kind of leading that effort, and just working with them to understand the use case. And they were helping us explain what the process would look like in terms of the rangers providing information to people who signed up for and got backcountry permits, and then what the experience would be like for them while they're out there and what kind of technology we need to build. So here's just a couple of the key features that we really have invested in. One is called Deep Links, which is just a unique URL that if you click on it with your phone or you integrate into like a QR code, it will take you right to that location in the app. So instead of, the park saying, hey, you got to go download this app and search for this and type in that, they can literally just click a button, click a link or scan a QR code, and it takes them right to this, study in the app. Registering, so registering within the app so we can capture the people's contact information and they're officially registered, reading the terms of service and approving that, and all the kind of legalese and stuff that the Park Service really wants to make sure that people know what they're doing and kind of sign off on that. Offline, obviously, the context here is the backcountry, and it's on the John Muir Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail, so not a lot of cell or Wi-Fi coverage, so being able to support that use case. Jeremy mentioned kind of different times of day, like at night when you're going to bed and you've established your campground, getting a push notification on your phone to remind you to fill out the survey, and then of course in the morning and sort of at different points of the day. So we were able to work with Jeremy and his team to kind of structure that to make sure it worked for people and fit the parameters of the study. And then the onboarding process, like I said, registering and onboarding and just that flow. Yeah, so what I think I'll do is I'll just, Jeremy showed this slide. It's just kind of an illustration of that process where people, register, use the app, during their trip, and then after, even if they're offline, it'll get cached on their phone and then pushed into the system, and then that information makes its way back into Jeremy and his team, so they can download all that information. I'm just going to I'm going to go ahead and well, I think I'll just kind of talk through this in the interest of time, but basically, yeah, here's a QR code. So yeah, you just scan that and it takes you right into the study. It asks you to fill out some basic information, approve the terms, and then you're off and running. And then you can click participate, and you can turn your phone off, you can put it in the background, whatever. It's not something you have to be looking at the entire time. And then those push notifications come in, and there's a series of questions. And on this last slide, this is what it looks like in terms of the questions. This question is number 3 of 22, and it's saying, hey, which of the following management units or organizations issued your permit? And you can kind of scroll through different options and select that, and then you go on to the next question. So yeah, oh yeah, here's a couple more slides. Here's the kind of accepting the terms and conditions, and then just an example of that one question there. So I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Jeremy and let him talk about some of the results.
Great, thank you, Ryan. I'm just going to pull up my screen here, and as Ryan was talking there through the onboarding process, something that was really important for our team was lessening the burden on visitors. One of the things we have to do, this project has federal funding, and as academics, our own institutions review this, but there's also a federal review process for any time there's a survey or any kind of public burden. And that was a big question with this one was, how is the app going to either place additional burden on or lessen the burden on folks using this personal device versus these traditional methods. And so I'm going to walk us through, reorient us back to that, that streamlined onboarding process with the deep links and making things relatively seamless to go from receiving your email with your permit requesting you to participate in the study and either accepting or declining that and moving smoothly into having the app on your phone, being paired with the challenge that OuterSpatial created here was really important to us. So again, just to cue back to kind of what we were capturing with this, what we are capturing with this study, both in the pilot in 2020, as well as the full study here in 21, we're really keyed in on visitor travel patterns. And Ryan mentioned this, that we're collecting spatial data every time someone interacts with the questionnaire. So we can collect that location of where those campsites are as folks fill in that survey when they get a push notification in the evening and they start interacting with the app. That location is recorded, the time that they start interacting with the app is recorded, and the time that they submit their answer. So as they click through the questions, that helps us document those burden hours. The travel pattern component of it kind of happens in the background from the visitor's perspective. We're logging their locations as they respond to the questionnaire. But the visitor survey is really targeted on visitors' perception of wilderness character and where they go on the landscape, and how that varies on the landscape from their perceived natural environment and interactions with other users. And then wilderness monitoring work, which is really our field staff will be out cataloging, and the Park Service has a great set of resources here that document the extent and the condition and the numbers of campsites and other recreational infrastructure on the ground. So we're really going to bring those three together in that spatial environment by using the challenges and the tools that OuterSpatial has been able to help us leverage on the app. In 2020, we were able to launch a brief, I think it was a two-week of user time, so 2 consecutive weeks in September, late September, where we were able to push this out to some permit holders. Yosemite was operating, as Ryan mentioned, COVID there. Yosemite was operating under some modified procedures for entering the park, both for day use as well as obtaining these overnight use permits. We were able to integrate our messaging with the park to solicit these folks, sending the deep links as well as traditional URLs to get folks onboarded. And we had 43 respondents that engaged with and completed or worked through some portion of the questionnaire with this app. Relatively low response rate, but not unexpected. And our team's been working closely with the park as well as with OuterSpatial to reflect on those response rates and target the right amount of folks to survey this year. And then as you look at this table, I won't go into too much depth, but as we go down through the task IDs, these are those groupings of questions, kind of the pre-trip, the cyclical during the trip, and then the post-trip question there. And end of trip is number 4, kind of your exit survey questions. We're able to, because we have the spatial data that the app captures, the OuterSpatial platform captures for us, we're able to vet our responses. We know that folks might enter their trip characteristic and their group characteristic data before they arrive in the park, but we certainly expect that their night of and morning of camping experiences should be occurring within the geography of the park. So we're able to do kind of like a post hoc geofence with that data. We're able to look at the time and the date. And then importantly, for calculating that burden, these 3 columns to the right, the response times, these are calculated from people's interaction with the app. And so we can look and see, if there's a particular question or a particular bank of questions as they're organized here that are costing or burdening the public more. And if there's ways we can streamline that as we make tweaks to this app for 2021 launch. We were able to take these respondents' data and do some comparisons. The park has a record of their permit number. We can link the data that come in from the survey, from the questionnaire here with that. And we're finding that most folks are in compliance with their entry trailhead. 95% of the folks enter the wilderness or enter their backcountry experience at their designated or their permitted trailhead. So pretty good compliance there. And 90 to 93 are exiting more or less where they've requested in their permit, though that's not actually given the freedom of choice we talked about earlier. Folks are free to exit wherever they want. It's really just that entry trailhead quota is the requirement they have to hit. We were able to look at trip duration. Folks that on their permit requested a four night trip. Did they stay in for 4 nights, or did they go longer or shorter? Again, they're free to do that. That's not permitted. The duration of the trip is not permitted, but we were finding similar results to what was found in 2011 in the early aughts, and then in Jan's work back in the 1970s, that folks are in general going shorter. Their trips are shorter than they request a permit for, but similar numbers so far, albeit with a small sample size related to trip duration. And then in group size, we're finding that about 80% of the folks, their group enters at the same size that they have on their permit, which is part of their permit compliance and part of how they ration these quotas. Here we're looking at, this is actually from Steve Martin at Humboldt State. This was a figure from their report looking at these wilderness zones. So on the y-axis, we have the wilderness zones, again, numbered from 46 to 99. And then the color coding there, I think the take home here is that, they're able to plot at that zone unit level if they're over or under capacity. Each zone has a designated capacity or stated capacity that the park's developed. That's what drives this trailhead to zone model. And you can see that, from early July through almost September, there's a handful of zones that really heat up with the colors there hitting their capacity or exceeding it for numerous nights, numerous sets of dates. So this is the type of data that we'll be generating when we have a larger N and not just a 2-week study, but a whole season of data here from for 2021, and being able to work with the park there on that travel pattern side of things. And on the wilderness character side of things, we're really exploring what you see on the top part of this slide, or these are motivations. So part of the questionnaire asks folks, why are they taking a wilderness trip in Yosemite? And this ties back to a lot of the language. It's in the 1964 Wilderness Act. But looking at, where folks getting in there to the green column that's kind of flipped from the rest of them is where they going into for modern amenities, which we would hope is in that direction. But a lot of these are about getting out for, remote or spiritual activities, connecting with nature, solitude, and other things there. So this is just one way we look at that data. On the lower panel here, we're looking at a single respondent's itinerary. So we're able to catalog, those are the 4 nights of their trip. They're split across 2 zones there. Night number 2 is in a separate zone, but this is kind of in the middle of like the Ireland Lake to Echo Valley portion of the park. Simultaneously there were other data coming in. That's what some of these other dots are showing, where other respondents were camping on those nights, informing that travel pattern portion of the study. And so, the tool, the OuterSpatial platform, and the tool that Ryan and his team have been able to develop to support this work in this park has been invaluable. We're really excited to see a larger respondent pool and a full study here in 2021. And part of what we'll be doing is comparing it to the traditional methods to look and see if there's differences between those types of respondents, as well as to work closely with the park to update their travel pattern link models that link these zones to the trailheads. With that, Ryan, I was going to turn it over to you to kind of take us through to Q&A.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. So yeah, a couple of quick comments. Just one thing I realized I didn't kind of illustrate earlier is that, the survey part of the app obviously has a very specific use case, which Jeremy was illustrating. The app in general, we worked with the park and all their GIS data in their team to kind of pull in, where the restrooms were and parking lots and trailheads and the trail network. And so there's a lot of data in the app that just allows the people to have, use the app to have a good experience just in general. And then the survey is sort of a component of that. So it's not, in this particular case, it wasn't just like they were using the app just to do the survey. So they're getting value just by kind of navigating on the trails and finding the camping locations and things of that nature. So wanted to highlight that. So yeah, and then I think that the last slide that I had to show was, we put a lot of time and energy into this feature, and we wanted to make it available to other organizations. And obviously, if you're out there and you're thinking about a statistically viable, academic study, kind of at the level that Jeremy and his team are doing, obviously there's an opportunity to work with him or on your own or whoever else to do something like that. But you might also just be thinking about a different kind of use case, like you just want to capture some demographic information, or you want to ask a series of questions about your visitors' experience in your park or on your trails. You might want to engage them in some sort of challenge, like a trails challenges. These things are really popular, where you create a series of routes and then you have people go and do them, and maybe they're checking into those locations and identifying which ones they went on, and then sharing their experience along the way. So we basically kind of taken this foundational sort of feature and we've built it out a little bit more, and now we're making it available this year to really any organization that wants to leverage it for really any kind of survey type engagement, and there's other ways to use it as well. So this was just an example from our organization that was running a trails challenge, and getting people to sort of engage with certain curated experiences and then fill out information or register and then use the app to get to those locations, check into those locations, use fill out some surveys throughout, and then that information, it's great for the visitor. They get the value of having the curated experiences and navigating in the park and whatnot. And then the land manager, in this particular case, was just interested in getting folks engaged in this challenge, and then asking them a series of questions. So yeah, we're excited to kind of roll that out and make it available to more folks. And really, I think that's it. We just wanted to thank you all, and please, we're going to have about, I think it's 30 minutes or so, 15, 20 minutes of Q&A here. So we look forward to that. And there's my email and Jeremy's email. If you guys have questions or want to contact us sort of offline, feel free to reach out.